I want to welcome everyone tonight to our event, The State of the Story, Writing, Working, Wandering. This is part of the Blue Flamingo Literary Festival series of talks and readings hosted by the Department of English Studies at the University of the Bahamas. I want to thank the writers for joining us this evening. I'd also like to thank all in attendance, as well as my colleagues on the Blue Flamingo Committee. Further thanks are due to the Office of University Relations for their awesome work, to the FLFA Dean, Dr. Douglas Barkey, and to the English Studies Chair, Dr. Mayuri Dika. I'm joined tonight by my co-moderator, Dr. Saskia First. She's an assistant professor in the Department of English Studies at UB. Her PhD dealt with representations of older Black women in US literature and print advertisements. Her latest research project focuses on representations of Black girlhood in Afrofuturism, and her most recent publication is titled Janelle Monáe's Dirty Computer, an Afrofuturist vision of empowerment for Black girls and young women. Thank you for being here, Saskia. You are all familiar with that old curse. May you live in interesting times. Perhaps I am not alone in wanting a little less of these interesting times the curse speaks of. But this is exactly what speculative fiction asks of us, to live through books and stories in times even more interesting and harrowing than our own. Speculative fiction covers an array of genres like science fiction, fantasy, horror, alternative history, and the like. It gives voice to alternative lifeways, explores the what ifs of our minds, plumbs the darkest possibilities of human experience. I'm honored to have these writers with us tonight to discuss and read from their work, to turn that curse of interesting times into a cure or even a blessing. We'll start first with Tobias Buckell, and I will introduce him. Born in the Caribbean, Tobias S. Buckell is a New York Times best-selling and World Fantasy Award-winning author. His novels and almost 100 stories have been translated into 19 different languages. He has been nominated for the Hugo Award, Nebula Award, World Fantasy Award, and Astounding Award for Best New Science Fiction Author. He currently lives in Ohio. It's very nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm sorry. Are you introducing?
Oh no! It's just one by one. Sorry, I wasn't sure.
Okay.
So you can start whenever.
Would you like? I'm sorry. It's Friday at 6. So did I miss a cue in terms of you want me to start reading now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. I'm so sorry.
No problem.
So let me pull this over and start. So hi, I'm Tobias Buckell, and hopefully that did not make you think that I'm a complete airhead. I really spend most of my time writing science fiction short stories, but I've written a number of novels, 15. And so what I'll read to you here really quickly is just a very, very, very short story of 3 minutes called Toy Planes, which for some reason now has decided to disappear from my screen because I had it up and was waiting for the cue. I guess got slight. I was expecting everyone to be introduced first. So I was kind of like, la, 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 la. Wait, what? So there we go. Okay, here's where that window went. So this is a story called Toy Planes, and I wrote it for Nature magazine, the science periodical. It was reprinted in the year's Best Science Fiction number 11, and reprinted in 21st Century Science Fiction, and it's near and dear to my heart. It's the first short story I ever was asked to read on Caribbean soil. I was born in Grenada, half my family's Grenadian, and hail from Petit Martinique area. So that's kind of I lived and grew up in the islands until my teens, and then moved to Ohio for schooling, and then somehow got stuck here. So Toy Planes is kind of the distillment of kind of my a lot of my thinking and kind of the stories I wanted to see, but that I wasn't seeing when I first started out in the genre in the 1990s. So here's toy planes. My sister Joni's deft hands flicked from dreadlock to dreadlock as she considered her strategy. "You're always leaving," she said as she flicked the razor on. And suddenly I was 5, chasing her with a kite made from plastic bags and twigs, all taped together, while shouting that I was going to fly away from her one day. "I'm sorry," I said. "Please, let's just get this done." I'd waited so long. I had grown dreads because when I studied in the US, I wanted to remember who I was and where I came from as I began to lose my Caribbean accent. But the rocket plane sponsors wanted them cut because they said it would be a disaster for a helmet not to seal properly in an emergency. Explosive decompression was not something a soda company wanted to be associated with in their customers' minds. It was insulting that they assumed we couldn't keep the craft sealed, but we desperately needed their money. So the locks, even though they'd become enough a part of me that I winced when the clippers bit into them and groaned, I let yet another piece of me fall away. In the back of the bus that I had pick me up, I hung onto the looped handle that swung from the roof as the driver rocketed down the dirt road from Joni's. My sister had found a nice house out in the country, a nice concrete house with a basement that opened up into a sloped garden on the side of a steep hill. She taught maths at the school a few miles away, an open shuttered building. And this would have been my future too if I hadn't have been so intent on getting off the rock. But one way or another, the islands always call back to their children. So we hit asphalt and potholes and passed the fields with machete-wielding laborers, sweat-drenched shirts knotted around their waists. It was so hot that my arms stuck to the plastic-covered seats. The driver leaned into a turn and looked back at me. "I want to ask you something," he said. I really wish the back seats had belts. "Sure. All that money, you don't think it's better spent on better roads?" He dodged a pothole. "Or more school funding?" Colorful red and yellow houses on stilts dotted the steep, lush green mountainsides as I looked out the tinted windows and said to him, "Only one small part of the program got funded by the government. We found private investors and advertisers to back the rest. And whatever the government invested, it will be repaid. Maybe." He looked dubious. I had all my extra arguments. How many people lived here? Tens of thousands. Most of our food was imported, leaving us dependent on other food producing nations who used satellites to track their farming. What spin-off technologies might come out of studying recycling in space? Why wait for all these other nations to get to it first? Research always produced such good things for the people who engaged in it. But I was tired of arguing for all this, and I only had sound bites for him, the same ones I'd given the media, who treated us like kids trying to do something all grown up. Later that day, the market surrounded me in a riot of color, fruit, vegetables, women in dresses and bright floral patterns, and the noise of hundreds constantly bargain over things like the price of fish. Teenagers stood around the corners with their friends. I wandered around looking for something, as we needed to fill the craft with just enough extra weight to simulate a passenger, and I still had a few extra ounces I could spend. I found a small toy stall, and in front of it, again, I was 5 years old with no money and a piece of scrap metal in the triangular shape of a space plane. I would pretend it was just like the real life ones I'd read about in the books donated to the school after the hurricane. And at night, when the power would sometimes go out, I'd stand on the porch and look up at the bright stars and I would just envy them. Today, here at the market, the stall had a small bottle hammered over with soda can metal and with triangular welded on wings and a cone on the back. It was painted in yellow, black, and green, and I bought it. The rest of the day was a blur. Getting to the field involved running the press. Yes, I'd cut my hair for safety reasons. Yes, I thought this was a good use of our money. Not just developing world nations deserve space. It was there for all of us. There are photos of me getting aboard the tiny plane with a small brown package under my arm. The giant balloon platform the plane hung from shifted in the genty, salty island breeze, and not too far away, the waves hit the sand of the beach. But inside, once we suited up, and once the door was closed and locked, everything became electronic. This was the cheapest way to get to orbit. Balloon up on a triangular platform to save on fuel, then light the rocket plane up and head for orbit. We'd scavenged balloons and material from several companies, one about to go out of business. The plane chassis had once been used by a Chinese corporation during trials, and the guidance systems were, of course, all open source. Online betting parlors had our odds at 50%. And we weren't even the first, but we were the first island. When the countdown finished, my stomach lurched and I saw the palm trees slide by the portholes to my right. And I reached back and patted that package, the hammered together toy, and I smiled. "Hello out there, all of you," I whispered into the radio. "We coming up too." Thank you.
Thank you very much. So structure-wise, I think we were going to wait until the end of the event to kind of field questions, unless you wanted to talk a little bit about the relationship of your overall work, your work in science fiction and speculative fiction in general, what it means to you, how you use it, particular influences that you've had over the years in terms of authors, books, even movies, other media. Okay, all right, very clever dodge, clever dodge. I guess if now, before I forget to mention this, one of the authors could not make it tonight, Emil Hunt, had some pressing matters to take care of, so he won't be here tonight. Unfortunately, we really wanted to have him. So I guess, were you gonna say something, Tobias?
Oh, someone unmuted me.
I just managed to get you unmuted. Sorry, that's my job, and I'll try to be better at it, but we have quite a few participants.
Yeah, I say let's let the participants go, and then I'll jump in after. I'm fine with that.
Okay, no problem. Okay. So I guess that kind of skips over to Alexia. And since the story was so short, you really didn't get to dodge all that much. Are you still muted, Alexia?
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm unmuted now. I wanted to know if I'd be able to share my screen because the story that I would like to read from today does contain some lines in a different language and it may not be familiar. So I want to know if I can share that as well. Let's see. Yes, here we go. So I decided to, for some reason, decided to share this particular piece, even though it's still a work in progress. It is my baby, and I'm hoping. Can we see the presentation?
May I introduce you before?
I'm sure. Go ahead. I am so sorry. Those are my nerves.
No nerves necessary here. You're among friends and wonderful people. Alexia Tolis is a Bahamian writer whose narratives explore the intricacies of small island life. She draws heavily from local folk tales and mythologies to convey realities silenced by tradition and trauma. Her writing has been featured in literary journals including Woman Speak, Granta, Windrush, Ada, and in forthcoming issues of The Caribbean Writer. In 2019, she won the Commonwealth Short Story Regional Award for the Caribbean and was later shortlisted for the 2020 Sunday Times Audible Short Story Award. She is currently working on her first novel. I'm very excited to have her here and hear her work.
So thank you so much, Dustin. I think my internet is a little unstable, so if I cut off, just let me know. So as I was mentioning, this is still a work in progress, but it is something that I've been working on for a long time, and I think that it kind of incorporates, the spookiness of the occasion with the rain. So I want to know, are we able to see the presentation, or is it not on?
Oh, we can see it.
Okay, good. Okay, so here we go. All right. This is from No Man's Land. I killed the foreman last night. He did look at me from the copper's floor and had slipped my tongue into his soul. Tastes foul. I only ever take the foul ones. You'd like the flavor if you could taste men as I do. Sweet rot. Jan Jan Butikaku. You know the flavor. Like the little yellow stones at the back of your throat. You taste it every time you sign a new man naming your rota. Man would look like you, talk like you, pray like you. Man to build your paradise. Is dirty work them policeman doing? Scraping up what left of the foreman from the side of the empty pool. But that na fussing on do it, Budikaku. Uwa. Is all you care about is the plan. How hard the foreman gonna be to replace. What he named Budikaku. You know him from any other man in your rota? Okoma, listen. I know he name. I'd have tasted between he bone and the muscle. It was a good name. He did a bad when he chopped down a cedar tree. He loved to chop just for the fun of it. I'd a taste he intent, the hunger to see my nest and the would-be eggs crack in the duff. I often wonder what happened to a man to poison his soul like that. Sometime I can feel the rotten moments like cysts under the flesh, tiny pearls, the body coating evil till they burst through the skin. But I know you don't care, Budikaku. In the fuss, you know, to watch the gore running down the pool walls. You just want to know if it could stand. The sergeant wrapping yellow tape around my trunks like that can stop me, whispering something about boar. Say boar. What boar left in me like you ain't shoot yet, Ishiyu? I see your fingers trembling now for the trigger. You shoot the lizards and the birds if you could. That's all you leave of me and Majumbe. My won't twinge at the emptiness. That's 3 men in a month. Ja. No more space in the clinic. Gonna have to store the body in the fish house now. The sergeant ain't seen this much death since. He don't want to say it. The truth. That he ain't never seen this much death. Not this kind of death. But you already know the truth. It lined the lips of the locals, fading when you pass and rise again when you think you can't heal. People in town say the resort curse. You say it's John. I let you believe it. But the sergeant know better. He glanced at Machado and the Brazalito, smelled the sargassum. Hear he grandmother whispering my name over the kitchen fire. The name would make him wet he bed rather than journey to the outhouse at night. You'd try so hard to hide my name, didn't you, Putikaku? Tried to bury it beneath your concrete foundations. Bury it deep with a new name. Paradise. But John reminded me. That's why you hate him. Why you reckon it's him who smeared the foreman all upside your pool. He'd have given me back my name under the cedar tree before your tractors tear it down. He'd have passed it to me over the fence between your site and his shack. I must thank John for that, even though I hate him. You think it's John who eats your men and spit them out like pellet, even as the foreman blood dripped from my beak, even as I whistle, Dakachika back, I want you. You only see what you want to see. But the sergeant shaky head. John's an old man. John, the barnacle on your spine, roots so deep he in the nerves. Sometime in the morning when you tread through my water, I feel him pulsing in your vertebrae. You beat my surf, kick my reef, break my dermis over and over again to purge the bitterness that's swelling your throat every time the sergeant dismiss you. But why you never doubt me? The sergeant done tell you, your workers done tell you, they see me in the pine. But I'd never do this to you, would I, Budikaku? You, the Ishiyu, who tamed me so long ago. You sink your excavated teeth into the casarina to silence my whispers. You fill in the limestone cracks with cement and block out the 3 eyes that used to walk you like amber ellipsis. When you build your house, you turn your windows to face the sea instead of the carpets that loom inland. And now, I don't frighten you not at all. But that old man, John, you seen him shoot a boar between the eyes with a single bullet. You seen him shatter its spine with one swing of his cutlass. The only monster that frighten you is man like John, because you know what man capable of. The sergeant bite his lip, say he gotta close the site. Administrator wants answers. 3 bodies don't look good in the newspaper. And with the tourist season coming up, the sergeant squeeze your shoulder and your skin squirm. Because he black, because he smell like Jergens soap, because he don't look like you or talk like you. I know what make you tick, Butikaku. Whenever I can, I taste you for the moment I can take you. But now ain't the time, even as you hold your breath against the sergeant's scent, or when your skin crawl to touch your hand. But then, my tongue trace your cheek. Dakachika bakitayu. I want your blood. And I feel it, assist. Dakachika bakatkun. I want your flesh. Growing in the folds of your meat like rust. Buktoko ina dakatkai. You gonna be my nourishment. This is where the rot start. Kwarika nanichi. When the soul turned foul. If you was like the foreman, I would have killed you long time. But you ain't, Budikaku. Your mother did your best to steer you down the path of righteousness. She was a good woman. I tasted in your blood. But men don't often live up to their mother expectation. Some men, like the foreman, born rotten. You was contaminated. I'd have tasted the moment the rot touched you. It touched you when you shoot that boar under the cedar tree. When you to keep shooting long after the creature dead. In your heart, killing was more than meat or bust over your uncle mantle. It feel like being a man. How I had hunger for your flesh, Budikaku. But I couldn't take you. When I slipped my tongue into your heart, I'd see your uncle expectation. I'd see John goading you on, hoping your uncle would laugh at the way he'd poke your cock with his rifle. Your uncle and John was men, but men is a fragile thing. At any moment, manhood could crumble. Only way to keep man together is to make more, to propagate. To be men, they need you to be one too. They teach you that if you ain't had no beachside bungalow in the Caribbean, if you couldn't sex no gal, you had to improve your manhood in other ways. Curse very particular, and there must be intent for me to feed. That's what foul the soul. Oriko no Nichi, come my love. Jan Jan Budikaku. I can't wait for you to leave this glass house by the sea and walk into my mouth. But will Chang come too? Chang glanced out the window at the black coffers and he shivered. Uwe, he won't come. He know what waiting for him, what waiting for you in my bowels. I was hoping Chang would come. Was him who said to chop down Masibo. Was him who said cut the branches from the heavens and pry the roots from the ancestors. Chang should have known better. You have your delusions, but he grandmother teach him to grow new bamboo and cedar next to the parties. And yet he strike down my sea before a pool. Why you ain't stop him, Budikaku? You act like you ain't never seen the plans. You sip your whiskey and wag your finger at Chan like you did try so hard to stop the foreman from chopping my daughter roots. Your heart did swell in pain where Masiba fall. It did cross your mind that this is where we first meet, and the memory bring a tear to your eye. You saw my red eyes staring down at you for the first time, your boy hands sticky with boar, gristle, and blood. When you did first fall in love, if you did only know. Akoma Nanichi, listen, my love. That sweet breeze that did kiss your neck, Dakachiki Ipta Bakatu Tayu, I wanted your blood. That sultry laugh in the Casarino, Dakachiki Ipta Bakatpun, I wanted your flesh. Ue Bukaku, I wasn't loving you. I was searching your blood for the taint that had rise into my daughter tendrils with the boar rank, the foulness of manhood gone wrong. I swear I'd have you. I'd taste the fetid desires of a dying heart, one that was learning to beat only for itself. I'd opened my third eye to look into your soul, but I found a child. You was blighted by your father's failures, your uncle's cruelty, John's need to impress the great Ishiyu. But you wasn't rotten yet. I did incur myself from you because I don't just take so. I don't just eat so. Chang threw another glance at the dark profile of the forest behind the dunes. He feel me, sense me always. But he don't see me for what he want me to be. He see me as I is, a rustle in the bush, a trail of hay and fresh blood, a ghost in the corner of the eye. It ain't what's supposed to be like this, he say. 3 he man dead. He can't even give them family's body to bury. He scared, his men scared. Chang light a cigarette. The red tip punctuate the darkness like a glimpse into hell. Chang laugh when you tell him it's John. Whimper when I shift in the shadows. Chang ain't following you tonight. He want out. He said y'all should never build this resort. He done. You only see what you want to see. But Chang done him a name. He learned to look for the signs. You on your own. When you pour another highball, your eyes trace the glass walls that overlook the tongue of the ocean. If only you'd look closer, you'd see me there, thrashing against the reef. But your eyes fall on the shelf next to the bar, where long metal shafts hang like black mangrove roots. A thrill rushed down my nape. The kasaina bakatutu, I will drink your blood. My feathers tingle. Dakekina bakatpun, I will eat your flesh. I can taste your intent, stronger than the ocean zest on the reef. Baktuka ina dakatkai, stronger than the whiskey in your lips. You can be my nourishment. You gaze out the small window that faced the dark mouth of the corpus. Wariko no Nichi, I already taste your flesh.
Thank you. So I guess Lasana has shown up. So we will move on to him. Is mic working and everything? I love living in the age of Zoom and technology and designed obsolescence, as Tobias mentioned earlier.
Yeah, unmute. How about now?
Perfect, perfect. Can you stop sharing the screen, Alexia? Please. Wonderful.
Okay.
Glad you could finally make it.
Thank you for being here, my brother. It's really an opportunity, and I come on as a kind of a fan as opposed to a writer who have exercised so much in this area, but as more of a fan and someone who's experimented with the genre somehow, and as somebody who's been working with a publisher, and we're always interested in new work and what's coming out of our region and beyond, and how that is interrelating, and how it's setting itself up, its authenticity and so on, its origins, its beginning, its links, and so. And you know, it's been a kind of a Twilight Zone episode trying to get on this Zoom this evening. I think we got it now with the sound, right? So I was
everything seems to be working. So
yeah, it moved me a bit. But you know what? I'm just going to read a section from a.
I'll do your introduction first, so everybody can get to know you.
Yes, I thought yes. Excuse me. It's good to be here, and I thank the host and the university and the professors who've been involved with this. And it's always good to be among the fellow writers who would, and brothers and sister writers who are doing this kind of work in our region.
And we're very, very thankful that you could take the time to join us today. Lasana M. Sekou is an author of over 20 books of poetry, fiction, and essays, including Nativity, Brotherhood of the Spurs, The Salt Reaper, and Hurricane Protocol. The writings of this James Michener Fellow have been translated, published in journals, and taught at Caribbean, North and South American, and European universities. Sekou is an independence advocate for Saint Martin, a territory of France and the Netherlands.
Thank you. Let me read a slice from an experimental piece in the collection of short stories called Brotherhood of the Spurs. One reviewer said, it's the worst written piece of an otherwise, you know, pretty good book. I tend to agree with it. It's an experiment, and but here we go, and see how I try to work this. Maybe less so dystopian, but certainly looking at kind of futuristic features and reality, and pulling things in from the current and things you wish as a dream to see come true. From Brotherhood of the Spurs, the story is called Fire Spill. In this time, small, prosperous city-states, city islands, able to move everything and everyone faster than the transbox, and more openly safe than the less regulated but incessantly warring outland countries, became the proverbial sprat. St. Martin was the uncontested Doña of the sprats, able to lead whales to feed without being consumed in the unrelenting frenzy of the planetary and lunar markets. Not long after the president inhaled the tea-sweet aroma in her air-conditioned penthouse office that overlooked Great Bay Harbor from the national government complex on the Little Bay Peninsula, the E-News headline at 8:15 a.m. stated that the terror would strike Paris in less than 48 hours. Headline, 8:30 a.m., that 2 optional download sidebars, and they flashed on the presidential suite wall flush-fed monitor, Cali golden mercenaries on the move. And the next, French have formula to foil fire spill. Lakshmi vid cleared for response, but she was silent. Jennifer Rye, my girl, she audio sent text. Yes, my president. Hold everything and everyone. New security codes were issued this Friday for every emergency executive contacts. I'm going home to freshen up. To sleep? To rest. President Akila Lakshmi rose from her seat like an elegant gale and sent her hands onto the claps behind her back. With her head down like a pensive ancient, she moved to the stained cedar and polished brass inlaid window, and she tipped its fingerprint sensor latch. Before her finger withdrew, the large window parted slightly in half and then silently gushed open, The sea breeze soothed away the tiredness from her eyes. She surveyed the stirring city. She sensed her people were as calm as the pinkish glow that was buffing the landmark Great Salt Pond in this blowing season. Then she felt the jeweled eyes of the figures peopling the colossal hill-high monument overlooking the hemispheric port and Caribbean Sea from Point Blanche. The eyes were intently upon her. The morning sun slowly turned the hillside into a dancing prism of glass, granite and marble, silver and gold. The diamonds donated by South Africa for the ancestral eyes because of the sun's good morning angle glittered a subdued angelic brilliance. The monument was a tonel to those who were consumed by shark jaws in the abyss of the Caribbean Sea and what was called the Atlantic Ocean back then. To those consumed without funerary dignity during the unholy centuries of slavery and indenture. And to those tortured until death by the whip across the salt ponds and on the vast plantations, up in the sumptuous mansions and down in the mines of the Western Hemisphere. And when it was unveiled 10 years ago, when it was unveiled 10 years after independence, DVD and CD-ROM school text and e-net tourist brochures, they stated that the steps were wet with tears for days from the thousands of pilgrims. And throngs stood in processional lines to pay their last respect, to rest the ancestors in peace, to seek atonement. And since the ancestral monument stood on high, descendants of the enslaved, maroons, and indentured, folks from original homelands, and those seeking reconciliation for the souls of their forefathers and mothers who had died with the whip in their hands and evil in their hearts, had been making this pilgrimage in the millions. And the president would visit, she said she thought she would visit the holy place this morning, offer a prayer, leave a flamboyant bouquet on the pyramid of steps under the eternal flame. She could, she thought, ask forgiveness too for claiming so swiftly, so selfishly the ambition that sought to make the sweet land whole, while at the same time souring the very soil worked by ancestors and to be walked on with innocence and pride by the nation's future. Was modesty given due audience? Did strategy give thorough thought to justice for all and duty to nation when opportunity for gain was grasped in the force of momentum and sudden rapidity? So she knew now that to claim immortality unengaged and unspeakable inner bulezine, she would continue to arch her back under the limbo's ordeal of fire. She felt like the mare on which divine horsemen rode through the night, in which one must weep for joy to come in the morning. And she would be the rainbow over which a pageant of generations would come and would cross to reclaim the whole sweet land. She was about to make a deal to unite St. Martin, which you know is an island, a territory that's been divided between the Netherlands and France. And so this is the president. She's about to make a deal, and she decided, well, before she go home, the deal is coming down, and it's one of these, century break type deals, if you will, it's set in the future. And so you see how I tried to pull in different elements of history, past, present, future, and so forth. So that's what that story, that's part of what that story is about.
Great, thank you. And if that's the worst written part of the book, according to the reviewer, the rest of it must be really good. So.
I tend to agree with him. That's really because it's an experiment. So when I read that, I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, it's an experiment. So you can, I give an experiment could be bad. It's setting you up for something, so to speak.
Well, thank you to our authors. Really, I love the range of the work that we just heard, from the very short to the very experimental. And I would open up now everyone to questions. So I think if you just raise your hand in the Zoom, you should all know how to do this by now. And then we will unmute you and you can address particular authors or the panel in general. So I think I saw some hands go up earlier. Okay, I'll fill in the blanks. I'm gonna go back to Tobias and I'll start. Okay, of course, Ide has a question. Thank you, Ide and Alexis.
Hi, good night, everyone. This question's for Alex Torres. You used in your story, was that a constructed language you used, or that based on a already existing one? Because it's pretty interesting how the syntax and the structure was working, especially on the page. And I like if you can elaborate and expand on how you create that and your thoughts around it.
All right. Thanks, Ide. It's actually reconstructed Tano. There's a Tobias audience. So it's reconstructed Tano. So or resurrected Tano. When I first the first draft of this piece was actually written from the villain's point of view, and I was challenged by one of my friends to tell it from the Chicchani's point of view, because it actually is a Chicchani. And when I thought about what language the Chicchani would speak, I thought Tano, I thought Lucayan, but it was very difficult for me to find anything, anything on that language here. So I had to do a lot of research, and fortunately I was able to find resurrected Tano in Puerto Rico. So using the very little skill I have in transcribing Spanish to English, I managed to get the syntax down. So that's why I said I'd have to show it on the screen, because I may have butchered it a bit. But I think that it's a wonderful work that they're doing in Puerto Rico right now. And I think that that's something that we need to be promoting throughout the region, because even if we don't see the culture, we don't see the people, it's in our blood. It's still in our blood. So thank you for that, Ide.
Thank you,
That
Ide.
is
Good to see you.
awesome.
Yeah.
Alexis, did you have a question? Let me unmute you.
I was just about to ask the same thing that I asked. So, yeah. But I liked everyone's story. Good job, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Yes, Ide did steal one of my questions, so for you. So thanks, Ide. By the way, was there a title, Alexia, to that piece, or is there a provisional title that you're working on? I'm not sure if I caught it.
Mm-hmm. There is a provisional title. It's No Man's Land. That is still up for debate, because I usually have to take my titles from my readers. I'm terrible at making titles. So when my last reader is done, she'll let me know what it should be. But right now it's No Man's Land.
Lovely. Thank you. We have another question from Dr. Sarah Singh.
Oh, can you hear me? Good evening, everyone. Hello.
Good evening.
Am I transmitting?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, very good. Yeah, so congratulations to all. I enjoyed all three pieces. And I have a particular question, comment, call it what you will, for Alexia. First, congratulations for, resurrecting, if you like, the language, and what you've done in the utilization of the language of the Tainos or the Lucayan reminds me so much of Wilson Harris's concept of the cross-cultural imagination. And when you said it's all part of who we are, you know, and because as a Guyanese, as a and part Amerindian, part Scottish, part Black, and part Anglo-European, you know, he sort of saw himself as the embodiment of all of these, you know, or of this multiplicity, of this diversity, you know, that exists in the region. And I wondered whether, you know, paying homage to those tribes that have been completely annihilated and, you know, expands our concept of the collective, who we are even in the present. You know, is it a sort of encouragement toward thinking of ourselves, not just in Black and white, not just in the here and now, but understanding, you know, according to the historic arc of things, that all of these inhabitants, you know, previous ones, current ones, and so on, are all part of the mix of what we might consider a Bahamian identity or a collective Caribbean identity. How expansive do you think of, you know, the identity matrix in terms of expanding within, you know, the Circum-Caribbean and even beyond when you write such a story?
Well, that's actually why I left out what island in particular this would be, because I wanted it to be something that any Caribbean person could pick up and say, I relate to this, I can identify with this. What I found interesting about the reconstructed language was that it's taking bits and pieces of what remains around the region. So it's not just from Puerto Rico, it's also bits and pieces from Guyana, it's bits and pieces from Haiti, there's bits and pieces from Jamaica. So this language is an amalgamation of that identity. And so I felt like that's what this piece would represent. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's what's in my head.
Thank you very much. And that's a wonderful answer. And that's the idea. I was wondering whether you were getting at that whole business of, you know, acknowledging history, acknowledging all of the peoples of the region and so on. Thank you very much for that response.
Thank you.
Odelia has a question. Nice to see you, Odelia.
Hi, good night. My question is for Miss Alexia Torlos. What was your inspiration for this particular piece? I also saw that you stayed like a little cultural with your dialect, so I also wanted to ask about that.
Well, this piece has changed a lot. I've been working on it. This is the longest piece I've ever worked on, to be honest. The original inspiration was actually an incident back home in Long Island where there was talks about a resort coming in and buying up most of the southern, what we call the South Side beaches. And they were going to tear down the pine, they were going to tear down the beaches, and they were going to have an exclusive resort in which the locals would not have access. And I thought to myself, where do you know, this idea of development, in some cases, it feels like panacea to the people, but it is destroying the land, this is destroying that connection. To think about not having access to that beach anymore really did, it really hurt when that initial project was put forth. For better or worse, it died, the project died, but this idea of owning the land, who owns it, you know? Because the first idea I had was that all the people I knew who, you know, don't really treat the land as well as I would like to as a local. So I thought about, well, the land really belongs to the creatures there, nature. So when I revised my voice, I thought it needs to be from the primary stakeholder in the land. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Did we just lose our moderator? Oh, there.
I'm still here. I'm just kind of bouncing in and out. I don't want to see people see me typing constantly. Dr. Sersing, did you have another question? Does anybody? Yasmin has
Hi, good night. How is everybody?
All right, thank you.
Good. I guess I have a question for any of the panelists to answer. Myself as a writer and a poet, I've been trying to transition into short stories, and I find that it is perhaps one of the hardest forms of writing to get into. So could you talk to me a bit about your practice and how you go about creating that your stories in such a compact manner, because I've been struggling. So I look forward to hearing any advice from any of the panelists. Thank you.
Well, Yasmin, I'm waiting for an answer too, because I don't I don't have an answer to that. I was gonna say, you think short stories? That you're a poet. I think that you're the bravest person alive. I think all the poets here tonight, you're the bravest people, because to be honest, I think you're halfway there already, in my opinion, because the musicality of poetry lends itself very well to short pieces. You know, when you only have a certain amount of words to express your story, I think that structure and style play a huge part in that. So you got a good foot already, in my opinion. But maybe Tobias or Lasana can tell us a little bit more, because I would like to learn more about that too.
Go on, Tobias.
All right. Yeah, so I've been lucky enough to have 120 short stories that I've sold at this point. And it's my favorite thing to do. I love short fiction. So when I'm, I teach undergrad and grad students. And so when I talk about, trying to write the first short stories, one of the things that I often find is that a lot of people keep opening up stories. They unintentionally write the first chapter, and they're always looking to kind of open up the world and open up the problems and add more characters and add and add and add. And for short stories, I'm always trying to encourage the newer writers to start as close as you can to the big emotional point. I often will say as a shorthand that a short story is, a novel is like a really bad week in someone's life. And a short story is like a really bad hour to a day, right? You're looking at the getting as close to that, like, the big choice that a character has to make, or the really big moment, or the most important moment of their life. And, the shorter the story, the closer you start it close to that moment. For an exercise, sometimes I have students work on finding the big choice or the big moments, the sort of crux of the story, almost what I would call your fictional thesis. And I try to get the student to start as close to that as possible. Like, you can even start a piece of flash that is just sort of the moment after the big choice, or the moment right before it, or the moment they're kind of trying to pick through it. And so that's kind of, a lot of what I kind of push people to think about. And if you can't use that as a metaphor, I use a lot of metaphors. If you can't do that, then the other thing I really encourage is to think of it as stripping away everything that you can until you get to the point where you have just the essential, right? You want to, it's like distilling, you want to kind of boil that mush until you have just vodka. And then you want to deliver just the vodka. And it's when you start thinking in like, metaphors like that you start getting into what you can do with short story. The other thing is to experiment. Short story form is so forgiving. You can steal. You can use a grocery list as your structure. You can. There's so much. It's rife with experimentation because it's so short. It's not like you've locked into a whole novel, and you kind of go like, maybe my novel shouldn't be a grocery list. This is a bad idea. But with a short story, you can kind of there's a lot of play. And so what it is it just has to be short. Yeah.
I would I agree with both my brother and sister writers. The start with what you know. go back to those basics to get a good story out. Start with what you know. Relative to the short story, maybe the more intimate, the better. So as opposed to knowing your national culture or even the culture of the town or the district or so on, start with something in your family. You know, a story in your family, a story that you heard before. I do believe that one of the most authentic lines into Caribbean, or to introduce us into the Caribbean short story, is the orature, the oral tradition. You know, we've heard stories. And so let's start to put those, let's start to encode them in some form, some text format, put them down. And so that's a good area to start. Start with the family. Some story, something happened to your grandmother, your grandfather, or your great uncle or your aunt or something. Some sweet gossip in the family that, you know, no one wants to talk about, but you keep hearing about it. And you've been hearing about it since you were like 7. You know, and so this is your time to maybe start taking the notes and put it down. And so, and then, you know, there's the very practical approach of reading short stories. You know, Tobias' pieces, his early pieces, what I know more than his newer stuff, because like I said, I come to this thing like a fan, particularly the science fiction, you know, read those, you know, in fact, read the earlier pieces of writers who have gone on to really shine in this particular genre. That's a great area. Tobias, Olive Senior is an excellent crafter of the short story. Kay Miller is on fire right now. You know, that sort of thing. Some of the old classics, Alexander Dumas, a lot of folks know his novels, you know, but he wrote short stories. And in fact, that was one of my practice pieces when I went into my first collection of short stories called Love Songs Make You Cry. The early detective stories, some of them, by the way, were set in the Caribbean and Cuba, if I'm not mistaken, out of the US. They might be good practice pieces to work on. The Russian writer who wrote The Darling, if you just want to deal with the short story form at its most basic and yet so compact, you go to a short piece like The Darling, and that just, you know, it fires the imagination. It leads to what the brother Tobias said relative to experimentation, and that line of experimentation is key for me, because I do believe, as I said earlier, that one of the most authentic lines or strings of the Caribbean short story should come out of our oral tradition. But relative to that experimentation, the folk tales. I mentioned the family thing, yes, but there are these folk tales, you know, whether it's the Jumbie stories that can lend themselves certainly to this area we're discussing today about fantasy and Afrofuturism and so on. But these Jumbie stories, they're just waiting for the modern stamp, for the new storyteller to tell them in a new way, you know, for that 16-year-old who think, I have to go to watch Star Trek. And then, you know, that 16-year-old wants to hear something from home as well, or maybe you can introduce them. So these are the areas, those 3 or 4 areas I think you should want to go into to help you. And relative to what the sister said about poetry being maybe the more difficult, don't be afraid to leave the flights of fancy and fantasy that comes out in your poems. Don't be afraid to let it go into the short story. Let it happen, you know, because sometimes, you know, okay, if it's you're sending the manuscript to be published, you and your editor might have a fight there, you know, but let it happen. Let the experimentation happen. And like anything else, work with what you know and go to some of the very basic lines of this form from wherever. You know, but certainly from our region, because the region is so rich with these experimentations and these examples. Yeah.
Excellent. We have one question waiting, and then I'm gonna let Dr. First Lachey, forgive me. There are some questions that have been waiting in chat that she's going to address briefly to the authors.
Okay, so
right
I
with
just
you,
wanted to, yes, because I think you're probably going to follow up, Lachey, with your question, but Stephen had asked whether or not there would be some more details about the authors that we could get posted up so that people can follow them. And I just confirmed that we're going to try and get some information posted on our Instagram channel, so do keep an eye out for that. We also have a website posted up in the chat group for those of you who might be interested in spaces where you can find Bahamian and Caribbean pieces that were written. And Stephen had a follow-up question about how do the authors find support networks across the region, or what would they wish for with regards to support in addition to what they've already found to be present?
Who's jumping first?
I think we have a.
Go.
I think that firstly we should remember and the writers themselves, you know, whether sometimes we admit it or not, we feel it, that writing is a kind of a lone exercise. You know, it's you and the text and the ideas and so on, and sometimes when you're in that mood and in that zone, you know, the last thing you're thinking about is networking. But relative to workshops and publishing and so on, that area is increasing. The number of literary festivals in the region that invite both writers from within their country or territory, within the region and beyond, is increasing significantly. In fact, the Flamingo Blue Festival is part of that. The St. Martin Book Fair, BOCAS, you know, the giants of our book fairs in Havana and in Santo Domingo are tremendous, and they reach out more and more to the different language zones within our region. So that is happening, but you too as a writer need to seek it out. You know, it's not going to just come to you like that. You have to seek it out. You have to seek out fellowship with writers. This type of Zooming and you know, book launches, and when you know another writer's having an activity, you go and you talk and you meet there and so on. And I think we have to make it happen, as opposed to only wait for institutions to set themselves up to invite us or to be there, because that's going to be long and hard in coming. It has been long and hard in coming, you know, but nevertheless, it hasn't stopped practically every island in our region, every territory and country, from producing a writer and writers, both at home and who have gone beyond in stellar ways. So we shouldn't feel that, oh, there's nobody to help me, there's nobody there, so I'm going to stop. No, first of all, just keep writing. Just keep working, keep producing, you know, and the networking will come. It will come more and more. There will be more and more agencies, because we have seen more and more agencies coming out and organize fellowships, awards, and so on. All of that is coming more and more online. But the most important thing relative to being available for fellowship and to engage in fellowship and to seek out and to know this network is there and to make it happen is to produce work.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
I totally agree. That was the only advice I had, because you know, for me, it's just submit. Even if the first piece that you have ain't that great, just submit, because that's the way I met the people in my network. You know, I have friends in Jamaica, I have friends in Barbados. I've met them once, and like in face to face, but we've established relationships over the last 3-4 years that I think, you know, those are my friends. And it all started because we submitted our work, and we were okay to make ourselves vulnerable. We were okay to accept whatever advice and counsel that we received. I think one of the best decisions I made was to submit to a workshop. That workshop opened a lot of doors for me. So take advantage of those opportunities as well. A great way, if you were able to find the funding, or if it's in your country, on your island, take advantage of those workshops if they're available. Take advantage of reading conferences like this, because this is where you meet people. Already, I think I have like 2 people or 3 people added me on Twitter, and I don't really use Twitter like that. So this is how you network right here, right now, you know? So yes, I totally agree.
I'm a giant nerd, so I always think of you know, Galaxy Quest, never give up, never surrender, which is kind of my approach. When I was trying to get started in the 90s, there was no internet really, and I had no idea. So it's just a case of just sort of like, you know, strapping a whole bunch of Velcro to yourself and running up to the wall and seeing if you stick, and just doing it over and over and over again. And you know, a lot of times people will ask me like, well, how is it, you know, all these people who are such a big deal, and you have these friendships and all of that. I want to say that almost every person who's in my cohort that I met, that became close friends, that have made the connections and support system that I need, we were all the people in the back of the room watching presentations who nobody knew back in the day. right? Who would all just meet each other after the panel or after the event that we were watching, or on, early online and forums, and be like, I'm trying to become a writer. Are you trying to become a writer? Let's correspond. Let's pass manuscripts back and forth. And in particular, I really encourage you to do it with other island writers, to form those cohorts and travel the journey together and keep each other, there's just this value in having a bunch of friends who expect you to do the work. If you're in a writing workshop, to have something to turn in every month, or if you have friends that you see constantly, in 3 months to run into them and have them be like, I've written a novel, what have you done? So you have this is like, peer pressure can be good pressure, right? If it's with the right people around you, right? If you surround yourself with a cohort. I still have to do that because it's still, even though I've published a number of novels and a lot of short stories, it's really easy to fall into the day-to-day. I've got kids that need taken care of, I've got a house that needs fixed, I've got all these responsibilities. And strangely enough, the more I publish, the more I get opportunities that have nothing to do with actually writing, that take more and more of my, not that I'm upset about being here to talk to you all, but this isn't writing. It's an honor, clearly, right? But more and more things like this kind of land on your plate, and it's not writing. So it's really easy to lose track of writing, and it becomes easier and easier the more and more successful things happen for you. And so I always have to surround myself with people who produce, and I have to check in with them, and they're around me. But I also recommend trying to find fellow island travelers, because it's also challenging to be in a group of non-islanders who don't know where you're coming from, and who don't understand what you're trying to do. So you need to find a cohort that gets what you're up to. And that's really important, because if they don't get what you're up to, you're going to be hitting your head against a wall a lot, and it'll discourage you. So, pick carefully, but pick people who are going to push you. I love being parts of these different, I have like 4 or 5 different cohorts that serve different functions, and I love them all, and they're all very important to me, and you have to consciously build them. But many hands make lighter work, right?
Well, this is something to kind of follow up on this. Like, we're building a creative writing minor here at UB in the English department. We're really pushing creative writing, and I keep telling them, like, this community of young writers is going to be the voice of their generation, going forward. And it's so important to have that. I was going to ask you all, I don't want to run out of time here. I was going to ask you all about rejection as a follow-up to another question, but I do want to get to the, really briefly, how often, because I know a lot of, in the chat, I see a lot of our young writers from some of my classes, and I try to tell them, just get used to rejection. I mean, how did you deal with rejection as a young writer, and kind of learn to build that callus up? Was it just the repetitiousness of it? Was it just?
So, yeah, this is something I'm super passionate about. So as you saw me get all excited, I absolutely, rejection is deeply a part of the gig. And so one of the things I show my writing students here in undergrad is I usually take this to class. And back in the day, you used to send things through the mail, right? So these are about 300 rejections that I have in this super large binder here, that I keep I'll take the binder to class and open it up and let them leaf through it, right? And see all the different rejections I had when I was getting started. I counted it up recently. I have submitted things 950 sometimes, and I've got 750 rejections, and I still get them. For me, it's a mark of trying something, right? The fact that I get rejected means that I'm putting myself out there. And they're always shocked that you still get rejected. I'm like, yeah, because I keep swinging, right? I'm always swinging. I always want that home run. I am always trying to be on the base. I'm always trying to play, to make a horrible sports metaphor. And I'm still getting no's, as well as all the yeses I'm lucky enough to get. I was lucky enough that I read this anecdote by Ray Bradbury. I really loved a lot of Ray Bradbury's fiction. speaking of reading lots of short stories, right? I poured over everything to do with Ray Bradbury because I loved his short fiction so much. It's just really interesting. And I read an interview with him where he said that when he was getting started, he set himself a goal of getting 500 rejections. And he said, if I got 500 rejections and I hadn't sold anything, I would quit. You know, and apocryphally, the story is that on his 500th submission, the editor sent him back an acceptance that said, you know what, we've seen you just keep improving all along, and this story isn't quite there, but we know you're getting there, so we want to give you an acceptance so bad that we're going to take this one, even though it's not that great. And that was how he sold. And I thought to myself, you know, I was like 12 or 13 when I read this. I thought to myself, if Ray freaking Bradbury got 500 rejections, then I'm going to have to get at least 500. That's going to have to be like my base minimum. And so when I hit college, I just set out with that goal in mind of before I graduated, I wanted 500 rejections because I understood, and I don't know why I got this idea, and I don't know why I understood this, because this is like one of the few pearls of wisdom I had as a dumbass teenager, right? Which was that I understood that there were things that were in my control and things that were out of my control. And whether I can be published or win an award or get something in front of an agent and have them accept it is out of my control. Like, and still to this day, I believe that that's out of my control. But what I can control is finishing a story, writing a novel, trying to make it as best as I can and submitting it, right? And so I looked at rejections as proof of progress. And I set out to get 500 of them. And I still use that methodology. Every time I send out something to someone, I'm actually at peace with the concept that it may get a rejection. It may not come back with the answer I want. And that's okay, because if I get that rejection, it's just a sign that I tried and that I'm out there and that I'm playing the game.
Mm-hmm. Alexi, as a younger writer, do you have any insight into rejection? Does the sting still linger?
I was bullied as a child, so I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this question. So I came in with I know I'm not that great, so I accept the fact that I will get rejected. I remember it took me 7 times to get my first published piece. 7. And you know what? Rejection isn't all that bad, because I remember I actually submitted 2 pieces to the Commonwealth Short Story Prize, once in 2018 and once in 2019. And in 2018, I got the best rejection letter. It said, you know, the piece isn't where it needs to be, but would you like to come to Barbados for a workshop? And I said, they may steal my kidneys, but okay, I'm gonna go, because what else do I have to lose? And the next year I won the prize for the Caribbean. And I know it's because, like Tobias says, see it as progress. When you get a rejection, try to let go of you and think about the story. The story's not where it needs to be just yet, or it just may not be the right place for it. So if you know the story is exactly what you want it to be, then maybe it needs another home. Or if you happen to get some feedback, you know, take that feedback into account. Kill your darlings. Karen Lord tells me that almost every day. Kill your darlings if you have to. But yeah, so again, take rejection as constructive criticism, and work towards making it better. That's what I tell myself. So.
Oh, 7 rejections until you first got published. I guess you're doing a little better than most of the rest of us.
120 for me. I'm jealous.
Okay, I'm not doing so bad. Yay!
I think we have like one more question, and then one question from Lachey. Is that correct, Saskia? Oh, those are great answers on rejection. Thank you all, because it presses down on students' minds. Like, what if I get rejected? I'm like, yeah. What?
Could I throw in a piece on rejection that is a little more, takes a twist relative to the publisher? Are you there?
Yeah.
You can hear me? My first, I wouldn't call it a rejection, but the first letter from a publisher, a major publisher, was a teenager. And it was a kind of a vague letter, but they asked at the end, it was, well, have you been published by any of the major magazines? I remember that clearly. I think it was Random House or one of them. I don't remember. I always mention Random House in this story, but I don't remember who it was. I said, wow, that's interesting. I was a teenager before my first book came out, and so I said, oh, so then you have to write to a magazine. And then so I wrote to one of the magazines in New York at that time. I was in high school at that time. And they asked, interestingly, they said, but have you been published by any of the major publishers? I was like, oh yeah. So that's what and of course I ended up going into to publishing and founding House of Nehesi Publishers in my dorm room in 1980. And since then we've published a number of writers, including George Lamming and Mehdi Baraka, and new writers and so forth. But that's not where I'm going with it. What I want, I'm told you that little quick piece to get into this. So relative to letting go of your darlings, like the sister said, and what Tobias said about being ready to be, rejected and let your ego go out the back door and keep moving on. And so this House of Nehesi Publishers that I found have rejected about 5 of my works. And the first time it happened, I bust a couple of bad words. I was like, who do they think they are? It was that attitude, I was like, it was for the first short story. And so anyway, I lapped my tail and I went and I made the changes. That was a unique piece of it. And it when I sent it back, it went okay. The second piece that I remember that stays in my mind that they rejected out of the four or five books that they rejected, it was the long poem called Nativity. And so they rejected it. And so when I asked, I said, well, what's the problem? I asked the editors. They said, we don't know. They said, but it's not ready. I was like, these people are losing their minds, And so I keep reading it over and over, and then I thought maybe something is wrong. The poem consists of 9 tropes. And the more I read and let go of the darlings and let go of ego and so on, I realized there was a problem. The tropes were not really in sync. They were supposed to be. They were supposed to work like that. That's what I had in my mind, but it wasn't working. And so I had to go to some of the senior writers and the classics, and I had to reread. This is important too for the writers who feel they get neglected. All that you have to do to go to find the work. Be mindful of what the sister said, that that story that might not be the home of the story where you sent it and they rejected it. Maybe that's not its home. But this is what happened. I went to Kamau, and in Kamau's writing, which has often to do with some of this futurism type writing and this type of experimental writing, I found the clue. I found the clue to make it work how I wanted it to. And all of in the text that was brought into, and all of the pieces started just falling into place like dominoes. And Nativity then went on to become one of the fundamental texts for the Caribbean civilization course at UW Trinidad at St. Augustine. So and that was years after it was published. But just to show you that being rejected, it doesn't matter who the rejection comes from. You can press on, keep producing, keep doing, let go of ego, let go of the darlings. By the way, some of those darlings you have to fight for. In that same story, that same collection I read from Brotherhood of the Spurs, one of the editors was from one of our islands. I'm not going to mention the islands, where cockfight is not legal. And he read the fight. He read the description of when they were bringing in the roosters, when they were bringing in the cocks. And he wrote back, he says, that's a title story, Brotherhood of the Spurs. He said, that's not believable. He said, that's impossible. So I said, you think that's impossible? I have been to cockfights and I have seen that. About 20 years later, I'm reading a description from a cockfighter in Puerto Rico. And it's almost word for word the way he described, I think either was the Forbes or New York Times journalist, how when the rooster's coming out and he's on the hands of the handler, and how the cock looks down the people and how proud he looks, and and it's almost what I wrote. I was just writing what I saw, and this was somebody who was in the field describing it. But then it hit me early on when I fought for that darling. Then that was in 1996, 97. What I realized very early when I read the comments from that editor is that, as a network organization, by the way, House of Nehesi pools people from different areas to produce our texts, right? Our books. And what I realized immediately in going over the text is that he had never seen a cockfight. The editor had never seen a cock. Like, he doesn't know what that is. He can't imagine a cock behaving like that, you know. And so those are so yes, there are things you have to fight for, and there are things you just have to let go. And it may come from a space very close to you. You know, it may come from the publisher that you've been publishing with for years. And all of a sudden that text that you love, and he said, nah, it's not right, it's not good. We can't sell that, you know. But always be prepared to develop it, to develop the craft of it, and to press on. Or that's not the home for it. Go find another home for the text if you're so convinced that that piece is good. As a writer, you have to have that kind of confidence. You have to let the ego, you know its place, you know. You have to put it on the manners every now and then, right? As we say in our region. But you have to also know what to fight for. Especially, by the way, especially when as writers in the region, we are getting the opportunity, I use the word opportunity guardedly, to be published by publishers in abroad, in the US or in Europe and so forth, you know, because sometimes the editors, they really don't know. They don't know that experience. They don't know that environment. They don't know. They don't know those codes or the nuances of it all.
All right, I'm turning to Lachey's question. I'm gonna skip over the chat question for now. I apologize to whoever posted it. Lachey. Let me see if I can unmute you. Back to mute. Did you still have a question, Lachey, or was it already?
Can everyone hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Get muted again.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
So I kind of have a combined question. When is it necessary or appropriate to add our own poetry pieces or colloquialism into a piece, or is it appropriate to make our piece completely colloquialized?
You know, when it comes to your nation language and the elements of your culture and so on, it's always right to do it. Always right to do it. When you feel it coming in, you may be writing a nice piece, you know, and then all of a sudden a piece of dialogue comes and say, well, I want to go with a thing like that. So where did that come from? Yeah, you know what? Write it in, let it come, let it flow. It's always appropriate. This notion of our languages being less than and not correct, and dialect as opposed to language, all of that we have to done. I think beyond our generation, that should never be elements that hold us back relative to what we are expressing of our region and of our people and of the world.
Strongly agree. Yeah, I was reading, you know, I haven't finished writing it, but I've had an article I've been writing for a number of years, just listing all the number of writers who are canon, who are passed down in the Western world, who were all writing colloquial of their time,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
You know, from Mark Twain to Dante, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were all writing colloquial to their time. That's what was astonishing about them in some ways at the time. This idea that there is that you know, those colloquialisms are the sound of your life should not be replicated. That is something, you know, I 100% agree that I hope the next generation feels no such constraints. You know, we've fought, let's just say this. There are many of us who have fought really hard to try and get that feeling out of literature, that there shouldn't be. You know, I'm really super excited to see colloquial science fiction appearing more and more. Like Celeste Rita Baker has been doing a lot of stuff with fantasy and science fiction that has a lot of colloquial language in it from St. Thomas. She's up for a World Fantasy Award this year, right? Colloquial can play on the international stage 100% with anybody. So yeah, if you're feeling it for the story, feel it. go for it.
I agree. Ida even says, let the spirit, in the chat, let the spirit of the piece guide you. I just listen to the voice of my narrator. And because I'm a person who prefers to write from the first person, that's just the voice that comes out. So just listen to the piece, listen to what comes out. Like Lasana says, sometimes you'll be writing it in a certain way, and then a piece of dialogue comes out, and that's like, well, change the whole thing. You know, we have to. This is the voice now. So let the voice guide you. That, and don't be, and like I said, don't be afraid.
Yeah.
And the good thing is that we're, like we said, we're seeing a lot more of the nation language coming out and work. So even if you're unsure about how do I write this? There's a plethora of stories out there to guide you. So this goes hand in hand with previous questions. Read widely, and that will help.
Also, you will find your own authorial preference for how to depict some of this, right?
Exactly.
So you don't have to feel pressure to do it any one certain way, right? You know, it's think let's be descriptive, not prescriptive, right? So even if you're playing with colloquialisms, if you want to show a dialect, you know, if someone says like you need to be doing it this way and not that way, like no, you can do it any way you want. You're the writer, you know.
There's a reason why our musics in the Caribbean, which are significantly made for our people, for the population, for the cultural mass, if you will, have become so popular and loved not only at home but abroad. Those singers, you know, and we can, from Cuatro Corriente to Sparrow to Bob Marley, who did they sing for? What language did they use? You know, so our text, our literature, you know, that is the trajectory. That is the world that, you know, that we are representing. And the more, interestingly, back to the network thing, you notice I left out bookstores and those kind of things, right? I just stuck to what we as writers want to network. But there are other institutions that need to step up. But, you know, sometimes we can't follow them neither, but they need to step up. But back to the writers, back to the singers, the way our kids, regardless of age, the elderly and all of those, go towards our music is what we want to see happening relative to our literature. We want to see our young, the elderly, we want to see all of them sit back, kick back, you know, with a book, with a story, laugh and say, oh, that was a good one, my son. We want them to also critique and say, hey, that story wasn't as good as the last one, you know. Oh, I don't think what Tobias think he writing this time, boy. Well, Extra coming with again. You know, we want them to say that and feel no way about it, because the most authentic critique relative to our music that has made it such a world-class music, all of our music really significantly are such stellar forms of expression and cultural expressions and entertainment. But their first and most basic critics were not the university. It was not the major magazines around the world. It was the people in the Cannibal Village, you know, the people down by the rum shop, you know. It was a joke on the side of the road, you know, that sort of thing. And maybe I lightened it up by some of the examples I said, but it's across the range of the society that critiqued that form that was produced by the people. We want the same thing to happen to our literature. We want our literature to have that kind of attention and embrace. And even rejection, we talk about rejection. We want to say, boy, that wasn't a good book, boy. I don't care what you say, my son. Or I don't care what the Wall Street Journal say, boy. That one here and there, you know. So, you know, we want to hear that. We might not like to hear it, but we want to hear it, you know. And so, and I say it in a kind of a general way. So yeah, that sort of thing. We want our literature to have that kind of relationship with our publics, like our music, throughout the region.
And
across the region. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. And I think it's really important, particularly since we're talking about futurism, you know, science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction. My belief, I have a little lecture that I give occasionally about this, but I deeply believe that we should tell stories about our futures. Because if we don't do it, someone else will do it for us. There are other people who think about the future. They're futurists. There are all of these people out there with ideas. You know, like say you're talking about development, right? One of the few ways in which Westerners can think about the Caribbean is in terms of tourism and development, right? So we have to tell narratives about our own future. We have to look at these things with our own eyes and tell these stories, or other people will tell them for us, and they will build futures for us that are not the futures we may want.
Or we will not be in that future, or it might be
we
a
will
future
not be in that
will-
future. It'll be gated off from
Exactly.
us.
And very well gated. I
Yep.
love it. That's very well said about it. It will be gated off from us. We won't exist. You know, so that kind of things. It's
And
very
in futurism, in classic futurism, we did not exist for a very long time.
Indeed.
The reason I started writing science fiction was because in the, in the 80s and the 90s, I had this, I say it's this almost Damascene moment where I was reading Islands in the Net by Bruce Sterling. And he's a Westerner, but it was set in Grenada. The first third of the book is set in Grenada. And I was like, this is my Grenada, right?
Whoa.
This is where I grew up. And it was an interesting novel, but I thought like there was so much he left that he didn't see. That was what made me suddenly go, why am I not writing any science fiction set in the islands? What's wrong with me there? Why am I trying to write science fiction set in New York? Right? Like what is, that myth of the single narrative that Chimamanda Ngozi talks about? Like I was deep in it, people sipping and having tea and thinking about the future in white collar labs in the States. And it just, when I read Islands in the Net, I was suddenly like, wait a second, I'm drawing spaceships landing in Charles-de-Gaulle Harbor, right? But why am I not writing about spaceships landing in Charles-de-Gaulle Harbor, right? So it was like that, you suddenly have that moment of clarity.
I want to ask one more question. We were at an hour and a half now. I'm not sure. I don't think we'll probably hit the 2-hour mark tonight. But there is the last question that was in the chat is whether publishers prefer to publish books versus short stories. From a publishing angle that you guys have seen either in the industry or as a writer when you're pitching books.
You probably have to find those the writer probably have to find the publisher or publishers that cater to short stories. That might help a bit, because there could be a kind of a bias against the short stories or a collection of short stories that may not be, let us say, may not be full 4 novellas, so it's that long, but it's very short. And a publisher might say, well, we don't know if that's enough, pieces in there. So you can get that kind of thing. But again, writers have to be creative and they have to be resourceful and they have to try to negotiate the space. So find publishers that tend to publish, because they've told us that relative to poetry from very early on. I remember reading those types of things. And the same thing for the short stories. Find the publishers that would tend to do that. That don't mean you only send it to those type of publishers, but put them in the mix when you're sending them out, definitely.
Awesome. Alexia or Tobias, any?
Yeah, the classic big 5 New York publishers tend to lean more towards novels. Economically, they make them more money, so they tend to follow that. Smaller, medium-sized presses tend to take more of a risk with short story collections. Academic presses, but the thing is, don't worry about what the industry is, and worry about what it is you're trying to accomplish. Right? If you are deciding you're going to be a short story writer, I mean, when Ray Bradbury was renowned for being a short story writer, it was still a novel heavy environment in his later career that he succeeded as a short story writer. Ted Chiang in science fiction is renowned for being a short story writer. He writes like 2 short stories a year, so he starts with what he wants to do and reorients his life around pursuing that goal. So yeah, it's something to worry about or pay attention to, but it's not something to let define how you're going to be an artist, right? Because if you find a way, then you found a way, and it doesn't matter whether the industry wants novels more than short stories. If you can be the person who slips in there and becomes their one person with a short story collection, right? If something hits with someone and it becomes published and it hits with the audience, then it's going to hit. So worry more about the project and what you're trying to do than whether or not, there's like, it's aimed at a certain, environment. Your job is to be a cockroach that finds a way no matter what.
Alexia, any last thoughts?
I'm taking notes as well, because right now I'm being pushed towards a manuscript. I'm being pushed towards a novel, I should say, even though all I've written is short stories. So I'm taking notes here too. This was a question that I needed answered.
And in our region,
sorry.
In our region, there's an interesting thing relative to the short story as well, that I think if we really look at it in a tough way, we can throw out. I always say, just like, I have a way of saying the Haitian novel is to the Caribbean what the Russian novel is to Europe, to say things like that, because of the depth and the hinterland it goes into and so forth. But I always try to make a joke, and it's not a joke, but I always look at the Trinidadian novel relative to what the sister just said there about she's seeing herself going towards a novel. And I always have a feeling, the Trinidadian novel have a kind of its own world where it looks more like, and I could be wrong for those who are better at literary criticism than me, but I always get the feeling it's like the Trinidadian novel gives me the feeling of a collection of short stories that becomes a novel. So that is a form, and if I'm feeling that for literature coming out of one of our countries, then that's good, that's authentic, that's something to discuss and to say, well, is that so? Is that possible? So while I'm looking in terms of so-called classic approaches towards novel, I can say, hey, the Haitian novel is like the Russian novel to the Caribbean. But then here's a new kind of a look. It might not be a full form. It may just be something I feel or look. Here's a Trinidadian novel, and it's like a collection of short stories. So maybe if that is a form to look at, to exercise, to experiment with, to say, I'm gonna write a novel, but I just keep hooked with let me see how I can string these short stories together for it to become this universe of a novel, so to speak. So that's for you.
Thank you.
Yes, so don't feel no way. Go for it. That might be what's coming out.
No, it's funny because I think that's actually what's happening. To be honest, I think that's happening.
I felt it. I felt it.
It's not uncommon. It is not uncommon. I mean, right now we're watching a TV show based on Isaac Asimov's Foundation, and the first Foundation novel is just it's just a series of collected short stories that revolve around the theme.
There you go.
There
you go. Perfect. I'm taking notes too, by the way. Yes. Yeah, we should link to, I don't know if in the opening I came on a bit, I had some technical issues coming on, but we should link also that this, to the degree we speak of futurism and science fiction and so on, how it's linked in our region and in South America to a significant extent to magical realism, and then we can bring in the novels of Garcia Marquez and so on. We can bring in the poetry of Kamau Brathwaite, and we can see this kind of seeding elementary. Even in the US, I see a lot of folks, they mention, the sister who's very, very well known. You look at Nalo and so on, and those type of writers. But I wonder if people like Julius Lester and so on shouldn't be considered as having seeded that ground of the notion of fantasy, a flight away from to another world. And he wrote a lot of some of his earlier works dealt with Black American folklore, but the extent to which this folklore was seeking to escape the plantation and so forth, to go back to Africa, the means, the technology that they tended to use, the magical technology, if you will. I think when we look at that, we can see the beginnings of this thing, and then it's not strange, it's not new, it's not, oh, it's the first time, or where do I find myself? No, you may find elements to help guide you into this type of writing from earlier writers, from writers that you might already be reading, and that's important to know, so you don't feel a kind of overwhelmed and so on. And the last piece I wanted to add to that is something that Lamming always points out. He says, in the region, in the Caribbean, to this day, certainly in his day and before, he said, we are, he didn't use the word force, but I'm going to throw that in. His word is mediators of culture. He said we're almost forced to be mediators of culture in the Caribbean. So you may have a man who's a taxi driver, but he loves art and he can talk art to the best guy. You know, you may have a guy who's a banker and, you know, on the side, he's writing a little poetry up in there, you know. You may have a woman who, you know, she's a gardener, she go down, but when she go home, she's scribbling some poems and she's writing them and she's serious about it and she's reading and so on. We've always had those type of people and they are still here. I say that to say, you can be doing a number of other things. You can be in a number of other professions, other areas of study even. But if you feel this penchant, this desire to write, to be creative in this area, in this line that helps to define futures, the futures of nations, of peoples, of the imagination, go for it. You know, don't say, yeah, you know, Tobias mentioned earlier, so sometimes life can get in the way. You got kids, you got a job, it's got hard work to do, you know. But no, you can still write. You can, you know, yes, life will get in the way, you know, and you go bust your tail and all of that. But you can still, if you started doing this in high school, in St. Martin, for example, I know a number of kids who in high school, they were writing poetry, and myself and people like Fabian Badajo and Dr. Rhoda Arundel, who's at the University of Bahamas, for example. We would keep an eye on them. Say, yeah, that's something coming up there. And then you see them in their 20s and their 30s, yeah, I don't do that no more. What? You know, yeah. Because life got in the way. Maybe they got into another, I'm just saying this to say, go for it. Continue to do it. You know, the book that you've started in your early 20s, you may not publish that until you're in your 60s. It's okay. We want the story. We want this narrative. Yeah. This is who we are. These are parts of who we are. We want to know. We want to know ourselves. You know, Suja and I have a joke we always run, and Suja read from the St. Martin book. He says, you know, HBO repeats stories ad nauseum, the same story, 2 or 3 movies, but it's the same story. The Catholic Church says the same mass every Sunday for 2,000 years. So yeah, we can write 10 Jumbie stories too. You know, you write about that Jumbie already. No, you can write somebody can write another Jumbie story. It's okay. You know, we need to have that feeling about our space and what we create and what we could create. We have to have that feeling because I think all people have that, and certainly people who engage this thing rigorously, for lack of a better word, have it. So we can do it across our region.
No one in Europe feels any shame about writing yet another story about dragons.
There you go. There you go. There you go.
We've got a question from Dr. Smith here. I think this will probably be the last one, and then I've got to do some outro information. So,
hey, good evening. Thanks everyone so much. I really enjoyed the panel discussions. And I just wanted, I don't have a question per se, but just picking up off of what Lasana was saying just now about, you know, making that connection between magical realism, Afrofuturism and whatnot. It sounds like another panel. And I wanted to take this time to invite all the panelists. We know that the major Blue Flamingo Literary Festival takes place over 3 days in the spring in March. And so maybe because this conversation was so rich, maybe a couple of the things that we can do for the Blue Flamingo Literary Festival in March, maybe have a couple more panels and maybe a few workshops if our guests are willing to be a part of that. Yes, I'm putting you on the spot. So I just wanted to put that out there and let everyone know here that the Blue Flamingo Literary Festival, the main event is in March over a period of 3 days, but every month we have panel discussions such as this one. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I cannot find this, but in I can't find the advertisements for it, but on November 26th, I know we have a poetry reading with 6 or 7 authors, voices across the diaspora. Craig, I've misplaced the.
Okay, no worries. I can.
Sorry about that.
I can let folks know what's happening. All right. So as I said, we have the Blue Flamingo Literary Festival every month, and our last presentation will be in November. It's an evening of poetry voices across the diaspora. That's Friday, the 26th of November at 6 p.m. That's via Zoom as well. We will have poets representing the Bahamas, Nigeria, Canada, Trinidad, the United Kingdom, the United States, St. Lucia, and Martinique. And so that is on Friday, the 26th of November. But also in November, we have a few more events there. They're put on by the English department, not necessarily Blue Flamingo events, but we have Edwidge Danticat will be giving the 16th annual Anatole Rogers Memorial Lecture. That's going to be on Thursday, November 11th at 7 p.m. And then we have the Critical Caribbean Symposium, which will be the 9th annual Critical Caribbean Symposium. We're celebrating the cultural legacy and the work of Sylvia Winter. Our keynote speaker will be Aaron Kamagisha. That is going to be on Friday, the 19th of November, and that's going to start at 10 a.m. We'll have the keynote, then we'll have 2 panel discussions. And all this information will be, you can find this on our Instagram page, Blue Flamingo Literary Festival, or you can also find it on our Facebook page, Blue Flamingo Literary Festival. And, or if you have any questions, you can always give us send us an email at blueflamingoliteraryfestival@gmail.com, or you can send me a message at craig.smith@ub.edu.bs.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Smith. I want to thank our authors tonight for joining us. Tobias Bakel, Lasana Saku, and Alexia Tolas. Those were really wonderful readings. Those were really engaging discussions. And I think that they were actually very helpful, especially for some of our budding writers that we had and have in attendance here. So I just want to thank you all. I hope to see you all at some of the events running forward. And hopefully you can join us again in March for the main event of the Blue Flamingo Literary Festival. It's quite a fun time. So with that, I want to thank everybody who joined us, thank our authors, and thank Dr. First, thank everybody who asked questions, thank everybody, yes, in general. So wonderful, wonderful. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alexia, Tobias,
Thank you.
great seeing both of you.
It was wonderful seeing you.
Yeah.
Great to
Nice
have you
seeing you.
all
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you
for
very
the
much for
wonderful
having me.
comments.
Very
Yeah,
appreciated.
covered all the speculative talk we wanted to cover, and
Thank you.
some great stuff for our young budding writers. It was a wonderful event. Thanks so much. Thanks everybody for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.